A Saturday and Sunday in hell coming right up for your viewing pleasure this weekend. Welcome to our big GCN Paris-Roubaix preview show 2025.
It'll mark the 5th edition of the women's Paris-Roubaix Femme avec Zwift and the 122nd edition of the men's.
So coming up, the route, including some safety chicane news, the riders, the predictions, and the chances of Tadej Pogačar winning.
We'll start with a very quick recap of last year. Mathieu van der Poel sailed to his second successive Roubaix win, soloing into the Roubaix outdoor velodrome 3 minutes in front of his teammate Jasper Philipsen, who outsprinted Mads Pedersen for second.
In the women's race, a group of 6 arrived at the finish together, with Lotte Kopecky taking her first win at the race. She got the better of Elisa Balsamo and Pfeiffer Georgi.
The finish remains exactly the same, as it has been pretty much every year since 1943, but there are some subtle differences to the rest. We'll get onto that shortly, but we should start by reminding you or letting you know, if you're just getting into cycling, this race is brutal.
Utterly brutal. I mean, there is a reason why it's called the Hell of the North, isn't there? Forget the cobblestones of Flanders from last Sunday. These things that they call cobbles in France are next level.
Yeah, they are so brutal that even if you've ridden them before, it's still a surprise how ridiculously gnarly they are when you go back.
You easily forget.
Yeah.
Don't you? Very quickly reminded, like you say. Now, if you at home ever get the chance to experience them, make sure you do. I mean, I know we've not really been selling it to you out there, but it will give you an extra level of appreciation for what the riders do who race it. Right then, on to the route. The men will once again be starting it in Compiègne, and they'll be covering 259.2 kilometres, which makes it shorter than last year by 500 metres.
500 metres of cobbles?
Kind of, actually, yes. So there are 55,062 metres of cobblestones this year, Connor, which I worked out using the official website, which means actually there's around 700 fewer metres than last year, even though there's actually one extra sector.
You want a medal for that, don't you?
I wouldn't mind actually a medal. It took me a good hour to work all that out. Anyway, the route out to the first sector is nigh on exactly the same as they tackled last year. At a couple of the points, it is a little more direct. So they reach sector 30, they count down from 30 to 0, after 95.8 kilometres instead of last year's 98.2.
A reminder that those opening 95 kilometres aren't as flat as you think. 770 of the 1,600 metres of climbing in the race come in that part. By comparison, there's 400 metres of climbing in the first 120 kilometres of the men's Tour of Flanders.
Yeah, it's kind of rolling in place at the start of Roubaix, isn't it? And exposed. So we've seen splits there in the past. We'll have weather and wind watch for you later on in this preview show. Anyway, as always, plenty of riders and teams are going to be looking to get riders in the break in that opening 95Ks, even perhaps riders from Alpecin de Koning, the team of the race favourite Mathieu van der Poel.
For some, it's a way of getting ahead and hoping that you're only caught deep into the race by a small group and thus get a better result than you might be able to otherwise. And for others, it's about getting ahead so you're able to help your leader deeper into the race.
Trouble is, it's easier said than done to get into that break, isn't it? The more it became evident that you could pick up a great result in that way, the more riders were trying to get up the road, and the more riders that try, the harder it is to actually get away in the first place.
Yeah, which makes it very difficult to judge your efforts. If you're constantly attacking for 60 kilometres, you're going to have burnt much of your matches before the cobbles even start. But if you don't jump with the moves, you will miss it. Some riders are much more adept at sniffing out the right moments than others, and it is a real skill, isn't it?
Yeah, some riders have just got the knack, like you say. Right then, the first actual sector of cobbles then is at Trois-Villars-Anchy. 2.2 kilometres long, and it's given a 3 out of a 5-star rating based on difficulty/severity of cobblestones. Now, last year, a group of 9 hit that sector with a 90-second advantage over the main peloton, which at the time was being led by Alpecin de Koning.
Sector 29, Villers-Écuyer, is the next one and also the same as last year. Alpecin drilled it there and did some real damage last year. It's the equal longest sector of the race at 3.7 kilometres.
Well, actually, Connor, if you drill down into the details, it's actually the longest by 44 metres, I worked out, but with rounding, they look the same length. Anyway, very sad, I know. It's then on to sector 28 at Quivière-Saint-Python. It's after that where we have the first change versus what we saw last year.
They'll be back on the more familiar route to tackle Saint-Python rather than taking the diversion they had last year. After that, there are 6 sectors in the space of 26 kilometres.
After which, they get a brief bit of respite, actually. So the 14 kilometres between Maing and Montchaussat-Écaillon and Avaloy-Walleur is the longest smooth part that they've got once the cobblestones start on the day, and actually by quite some margin. So they want to take advantage of that because Walleur is deemed to be one of the most important moments in the race each year.
Partly because it's hard in itself, partly because it precedes the first 5-star sector, the Arenberg Forest, so positioning becomes even more important. However, last year there were only 30 riders left there after Alpecin hammered it.
Positioning was still important though, Conor, wasn't it, last year? Because they made a last-minute decision, the race organisers, to add in a chicane / hairpin / U-turn to effectively slow the riders down on entry into the Arenberg.
There was quite the controversy over that, wasn't there?
There was, yes. I think many people thought it would make the race potentially even more dangerous, but I guess because the group was so small, it was safe enough on the day. However, they've ditched that this year, and instead, they found a deviation onto a different road that they hope will also slow the riders down.
So, they take a left turn a few hundred metres before the entry, then right down the Rue de Croix, which takes them past an old mining site, right at the end, and then left onto the Arenberg.
I actually looked at that road last year and wondered why they didn't use it. I thought it could be quite a good option. I think part of the reason probably is I think it's a private road. So they would have had to get permission for it, which they seem to have done this year. Anyway, I think that's the best way they could do it, personally.
How should we describe the Arenberg?
Well, now there's a question.
Yeah.
I would say the Arenberg is like driving a Lamborghini flat out down a road that's full of speed bumps, while simultaneously having someone beat your arms and legs with like a soft hammer or something.
I've not heard it described like that before, but to be fair,
you asked.
It seems accurate. The one saving grace though with the Arenbergs, it is straight, 2.3 kilometres.
2.32?
2.32 kilometres. Yep. Gently uphill near the end and made up of the biggest, most unevenly laid stones you can imagine.
They're horrible, aren't they?
Yeah, once you're on them.
The old adage applies there, so you can't win the race on the Arenberg Forest, but you can certainly lose that. We've seen that plenty of times in the past. At the end of it, they turn left, briefly onto a much bigger road. Now, as a rider, this is where you get to assess what damage you've done to others or what damage has been done to you. And I guess as a viewer, this is where we try to figure out who's disappeared and who's off the front in the lead group.
Yeah, it's a bit like having a debrief, that feel. From there, though, the route is a carbon copy of last year, many previous years, actually. After the Arenberg, there is never more than 6 kilometres between any 2 sectors.
Yeah. Which is not much respite, is it? I guess how relaxing those parts are between the cobblestones depends on the race situation and the wind, which had a really big impact last year. Ornaing à Wandigny is the other 3.7 kilometre sector of the race, and it's named after John Degenkolb, actually, because of the help that he gave the junior version of Paris-Roubaix when that race was in financial trouble.
Yeah, it's a 4-star sector, and from there it's another 18 kilometres to the Getty, which isn't a sector we talked about much on our preview last year. But the reason we are this year is because that's where Mathieu van der Poel made his race-winning move in 2024.
With just under 60 kilometres to go, wasn't it? I'm finding it hard to see a repeat of that this year, I've got to say, but it very much depends on the wind and how the race has been ridden up to that point. We'll have wind watch for you later on. Either way, that sector is 1.7 k's long and they've given it a 3-star rating.
Once they come off it, it's around 10 kilometres until the second of the 3 5-star sectors at Mont-Saint-Pavel. This one can be muddy, even if it's been dry on the lead up to the race, because the fields alongside it get so wet. We have had a long dry spell here in Northern Europe, so that shouldn't be the case this year.
I wouldn't have thought so, no, but either way, that's a horrible sector, isn't it? 3 k's long with a couple of sort of slow corners that mean you have to scrub off your speed and then accelerate back up to speed afterwards, which is not an easy thing to do on pavé, is it?
No. A rare climb comes just after the exit, albeit straight, and on a really big road. And they'll proceed to tackle a further 7 sectors before they reach the infamous Carrefour de l'Arbre. This is another one that earns its 5-star rating because of the severity of the cobblestones and also the corners, which makes it even harder.
There was all sorts of drama on that sector, wasn't there, a couple of years ago, with John Degenkolb knocked off his bike and then Wout van Aert puncturing after accelerating off the front of the lead group. He still, incidentally, holds the Strava record for that sector from that day, even with that puncture.
Oh, crikey, it's not bad going, is it?
Not bad going, no.
There's the briefest of respites before Gruson, which is much straighter and much smoother. if you can describe cobbles like that. And then it's Willems-Ahelm, the last true sector, then the 300 metres of Roubaix Espace Charles Croupelant section.
Not easy to say that one.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
I think I described that sector last year or the year before as being man-made, forgetting that every other cobble sector wasn't just a natural wonder of the world. What I meant by that was that the cobbles there are very evenly laid, presumably using more modern methods of cobblestone laying. Anyway, all that really remains after that is a lap and a half of that famous outdoor Roubaix velodrome.
On to the women's, which is exactly the same as last year. 148.5 kilometres from Dinant to Roubaix, with 29.2 kilometres of pavé over 17 sectors.
Yeah, so the same initial 60k lap, which takes them back into Dinant, all on smooth roads, and then it's on to sector 17, Ornaing à Wandigny. Now, we mentioned earlier that Mathieu van der Poel made his race-winning move at Orchy last year, but in the first edition of the women's, Lizzie Deignan went on that very first sector that I just mentioned with 82 kilometres to go.
That was ridiculously impressive.
It was, yeah.
It's been a little cager in the editions since, but anyway, the women's race will tackle the same final 17 sections as the men's, albeit 24 hours earlier.
And that includes 2 of the 5-star sectors, doesn't it? So Mons-en-Pavel and Carrefour de l'Arbre. But yeah, exactly the same as the men's after that initial loop around Dinant is completed. So we should probably move on to the favourites now.
Hold your horses. A couple of promos first.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Forgot those.
Firstly, our shop. We've got a range of t-shirts dedicated to this year's Spring Classics, which you can get by clicking on the link below this video or scanning the QR code that's on screen now. I'm actually wearing one today.
Yeah, Colin's wearing one from the Ronda. A massive thanks, incidentally, to everyone that's been supporting us in that way over the last few weeks. And then the other promo that I almost forgot about is for a video that we actually released a couple of years ago, but still very relevant for Sunday and Saturday. As with Mitch Docker, who lived for this race as a rider, didn't he? He took a look at the history of Paris-Roubaix and what makes it so special. So we'll put a link to that in the description below this video as well.
Okay, on to the favourites, and we're going to go by the bookmakers' odds here. So top favourite for them is Mathieu van der Poel. No, that hasn't changed since his defeat at Flanders on Sunday, and probably for good reason. It was revealed after the race that he'd been unwell and on antibiotics on the lead into it, plus he's won this race the last 2 years in a row.
It did look pretty bloody good last Sunday in Flanders, didn't he, given that he crashed quite hard, and as you just said, we found out later he'd been ill. Anyway, his team, I would say, is arguably more suited to Roubaix than Flanders. Jasper Philipsen has finished second for the last 2 years, and he's a real asset for that team to have.
Exactly. Van der Poel knows that if Philipsen is nearby, he's got that card to play. If he's away with Pedersen, for example, he wouldn't be confident in out-sprinting him. So if Philipsen is behind, you can say he's not going to work.
That said, Philipsen hasn't looked so sharp since that crash he had at Knocker-Corsa a few weeks back, so I'm not sure he's got quite the same legs as those last 2 editions. We'll get a bit more insight this Wednesday, actually, at Scheldeprijs, which will probably be finished, actually, by the time this preview comes out.
Alpecin have also got Gianni Vermeersch, who was so good last year as well. Yeah, and it looks like they'll also have Caden Groves, who is another card to play.
Certainly was on his schedule originally, but he did pull out of a race recently due to a knee injury, but I hope he is there because he could be a really interesting prospect. He's only done this race once, finished 31st a couple of years ago, but he's much stronger as a rider right now, I'd say. Anyway, they are by far and away the best team in this race when it comes to potential winners and disruptors, I'd say. And we mentioned earlier how incredible they were last year. They ripped it up pretty much from start to finish, certainly from the start of the cobblestones.
OK, second favourite today, Pogačar. We can argue whether or not he should be second favourite, but I guess if you're the bookmaker, you're not risking it.
They don't like taking risks.
No. Do you know the last rider to win the men's Paris-Roubaix on their debut at the race?
I should know. Oh, go on.
Colbrelli, 21.
Oh, yes.
However, it is very rare.
Are you trying to say that this is bad news for Pogačar?
Probably not.
Well said. I do know what you mean, though. He shouldn't win this race, in theory, should he? He's not heavy enough, he's not experienced enough, he's not as fast in a sprint as most of his key rivals. But would it be a surprise if he won it? Absolutely not.
It's crazy, really, isn't it? I really do think that the bikes are opening up to lighter riders, though. I mean, if everyone suddenly had to go back to 25mm tyres like they had in the 90s, I think Pogačar being lighter would be a bigger disadvantage.
I'd agree with that, yes. The thing we've got to ask ourselves, though, Connor, how does he win? I mean, obviously crossing the line first, but where does he get away from those other bigger, more powerful riders?
That's the conundrum. isn't it? There isn't really much of a comparison between San Remo and Roubaix, but if he couldn't get rid of Mathieu van der Poel and Ganna on 4% gradients, going to be hard on 0%.
That's a very good point, yeah. Maybe he'll go on that climb that we talked about earlier, just after Mons en Pavel. Anyway, whatever happens, it's going to be fascinating to watch him race this Sunday. Fair play to him for even doing it. It's not a risk that I thought I'd see any Tour de France favourite take in this modern era.
No. I mean, if I was Tour de France, I don't know if I'd do it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not today, Pogačar. Based on his route recon, though, he is pretty fast.
Well, yeah, he took a couple of KOMs, didn't he, the week before Flanders. Although, did you notice that Philippe Gilbert put up a video on social media last weekend showing that he was behind a motorbike, Pogačar, for at least some of those segments.
Controversial.
Yes, very controversial. He has got a good team around in the UAE. Pollitt, Vermeers, Wellens, Morgado, probably Mikel Biel as well, so really, really solid.
Yeah. Right, next up, Wout van Aert. He's slightly shorter odds than Pedersen, and that's probably down to a more promising ride in Flanders on Sunday.
More promising for him, yeah. I guess Pedersen was great strong as well, wasn't he? But Van Aert showed great endurance at the Tour of Flanders, I would say. He didn't fade as much as some of the others, and that's going to be really important this coming Sunday. It feels like longer than 2 years ago, isn't it? That puncture over the Carrefour de l'Arbre where he came so close, having a great chance of winning.
That must still haunt him.
Oh, he's got to.
Yeah. I think he's got what it takes this Sunday, though. We saw at Flanders that he was given a bit more leeway than Pogačar and Van der Poel. I think the fact that he's no longer seen as being on their level could be to his advantage.
Yeah, I'd go with that as well. Visma Lease bike could do with a big result here, I would say. It's been a couple of classics to forget for them so far. They do actually have a former winner of this race starting as one of his teammates as well, Dylan van Baarle. He's been blighted by injuries, though, these last 18 months or so, but I reckon should still provide some good support for Van Aert on the day.
I think he could surprise as well. He was mega strong at Tours de Vlaanderen. I'm actually surprised that his best result in this race is 71st. It seems like it should really suit him.
That is a surprise, yeah. OK, then, moving on. Next favourite is Mads Pedersen of Lidl Trek. Now, I think the bookies have got that one wrong, personally. Given what we've seen of him these last few weeks, on this course, I'd say he should be at least second favourite.
Yeah, unbelievably powerful. An incredible sprint at the end of a hard race too. A very strong team. It feels like this is his big chance. He's never won a monument, though, has he?
He's not, no, World Championships,
yeah.
Obviously in Harrogate a few years ago, but not a monument. He's had 4 podiums, but never the win. I'm rooting for him, I've got to say. He's got Sturven, who's also in fantastic shape, obviously. Jonathan Milan, who's just a beast. Ola, who's got a massive engine. Vacek, not quite on his best form, but still a beast, which is quite a team, I would say.
Like you said, he can back his sprint. He doesn't need to get to the Velodrome alone, just at the front.
Yeah. I think he's... Well, we'll get predictions later, shall we? OK, next on the list is Jasper Philipsen. We've already mentioned him. So after that, in terms of favourites, it's Ineos Grenadiers' Filippo Ganna.
This is the classic he's been most focused on this year. He's the sort of build you think of when it comes to Paris-Roubaix.
A horse, basically. He didn't race last year, but he did finish 6th in 2023. I think he's a better rider now, though, quite frankly. And like Van Aert, I think he might have a bit of leeway on the day. Enough hesitancy with the others that he could get a gap if he attacks.
Yeah, and he's not a man you want to give a gap on a flat race, is he?
No,
definitely
very
not.
True. I don't think he'll win, personally. I'd love to see it. I was also expecting Ineos to go with Josh Tarling as a co-leader with Ganna, but he fell ill just before Flanders and didn't race there, so his form now is a bit of an unknown.
He was just wanting to forget last year, I suppose. He got disqualified for that sticky bottle after a mechanical.
He did. The stickiest of sticky bottles, that one, wasn't it? Justifiable decision by the UCI, that one. But he is another rider that is built for this race in terms of his size and his power.
After Ganna is Gianni Vermeers and Jonathan Milan, and after them is Stefan Kuhn. Solid as ever at Flanders with a top 10 there, and he's been on the podium before at Roubaix. 3rd in 2022, 5th for the last 2 years.
And he's been top 10 at his last 3 one-day races. He's so dependable, Stefan Kuhn, as a rider, but it's also just so hard to see him winning, isn't it? He's just not a winner, unfortunately. Again, I'd love to see it. Florian Vermeers is next, but he'll must undoubtedly be working for Tadej Pogačar. And then is John Degenkolb, who isn't racing.
Yeah, he crashed out of Flanders with 3 fractures.
Yeah.
I'm gutted for him. He loves this race so much. And it'd have been brilliant to see him back again.
I know.
Laurens Piffy leads Bora Hansgrohe, but just keep your eyes out for the Van Dijk twins. They both performed really well last year, and Jordi Mus can't be discounted either. He was 8th last year.
That is a strong team, actually, Red
Yeah.
Bull Bora Hansgrohe, isn't it?
Yeah, and Roubaix is a race where you can play those numbers a bit more easy than you can in Flanders. Right, Uno X, Christoph, Abrahamson, Warren Sold. The latter was 9th last year, and at 90 kilos plus, this one should suit him.
Oh, you'd have thought so. He's not shown the same form as he did when he won Omloop in February, but nevertheless. Christoph, meanwhile, a little bit past his best now, but still strong as an ox. I was surprised, actually, when I looked up Christoph's best results in this race. 9th.
You think it'd be higher than that?
Yeah, I just assumed he'd done much better at some point in his career. Abrahamson, meanwhile, is the type of rider that we think should try and get in one of the earlier moves on the day.
Tim Merlier is next. He's never been better than 23rd, though, and it does feel like a top 10 is a long shot for him. Then there's Mohoric, 5th here in 2022, but he's not found his best legs so far this year.
No, getting there. He looked a little bit better in Flanders last Sunday, but yeah, everything would have to go perfectly and all fall into place for him to get another top 5, I would say. Bahrain also have Fred Wright and Tamarche have got Gamay and Rex. Gamay is actually making his debut at Roubaix this Sunday, but watch out for Rex. He has been quietly consistent the last few weeks and he absolutely loves Paris-Roubaix.
In the absence of Deli, Lotto will look to Alex Segart, whilst Yeko have Max Welshine.
Yeko. I
always do that one, right?
We'll go with that.
Yeko.
Change the name from now on.
I confuse myself. Jaco.
Yeah.
I always think it's Jaco, then I'm like, I must be something else.
Right, a couple more to mention before we move on to the women's favourites. Garcia Cortina for Team Movistar. Good last Sunday in Flanders, but never really troubled the front runners in Roubaix. Niels Eekhoff for Picnic Post NL. Good form this year. And basically all of Unibet Tietema Rockets. This will be their first ever monument as a team and they are going to be mega motivated. Oh, my dark horse. I almost forgot my dark horse.
Who's that?
Ready?
Yep.
Yevgeny Fedorov.
Okay.
1,000 to 1, Connor. But he was 14th last year, and he's another rider who's been quietly picking up some decent results in the Cobble Classics over the last couple of weeks. And Astana actually have quite a decent team, I would say, here. Ballerini and Turnison aren't names that would be at the forefront of your mind for Sunday, but I wouldn't be surprised if Astana got a couple of riders in the top 20 at the race.
Yeah, for sure. In the women's, we once again have to start with ST Works and Lotte Kopecky. Last year's winner, last week's winner, she is the woman to beat.
And they're the team to beat too, aren't they, SD Works? They're going to be even more dangerous at Paris-Roubaix than they were in Flanders, I would say. Reason being that Lorena Wiebes is much less likely to be distanced. It's a bit like the Van der Poel and Philipsen combination that we just talked about. It makes it very difficult for other teams to win because they're almost always going to be there with an SD Works rider who's going to be faster than them in a final sprint to the line.
Yeah, she's even skipping Skel de Prix this year to be fresher for Roubaix, which is ominous. It's been so rare over the last couple of years that she's been beaten in a sprint. Plan A for every team should be to get to the velodrome ahead of her.
Should be. Easier said than done, though, I'd say, that plan. Although the wind direction will make it easier. More teasing on the wind forecast for later. Now, the rest of SD Works is also really strong, so they should have the power between them to get those two leaders in the right place at the right time. Although, we've said that in the past, and it hasn't always been the case.
Now, one rider who might fancy her chances in a sprint against Kopecky is Little Trek's Elisa Balsamo. She's been really good so far in 2025 and she deliberately skipped Flanders to freshen up.
Yeah, she's got a good chance, I would say. I'm also expecting Ellen van Dijk to rip it up on Saturday. She was top 10 in Flanders last Sunday, but this race suits her a lot more than that one does. It looks like 2021 winner Lizzie Deignan won't be racing this year, but they do also have Shirin van Androoy, Emma Norsgaard and Lucinda Brandt.
Wow, that's quite the lineup, isn't it? No Anna Henderson?
I don't think so, no. I seem to remember she's concentrating on the Ardennes Classics later on in the season, or a couple of weeks' time, should I say. But either way, if any team can beat SD Works, I think it is Lidl Trek. Right, third in last year's race was Pfeiffer Georgie of Picnic Post. Now, I will never forget how happy she was, understandably, with that result last year.
Yeah, it was great to see, wasn't it? She's been there or thereabouts in the recent 1 days, but without any standout performances. But Roubaix is just a different beast, isn't it? You just never know in this race.
She could definitely be up there this year. Next up, Marianne Vos. Now, unfortunately, she fell ill a couple of weeks ago. She wasn't quite herself at Flanders on Sunday, but hopefully she'll be close to being 100% again by this coming Saturday. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again now. It would almost be a crime if she finished her career without winning Roubaix.
It would seem fitting to have her name on the winners list, wouldn't it? I really hope she had her best on Sunday. And I'd say she needs to be kind of to stand a chance of winning. The standard is just so high.
Yeah, that's very true, very true. From Prevost, her teammate, is another rider making her debut at this race, but given her background in mountain biking and cyclocross, you'd imagine she'd be pretty handy over cobblestones as well. Visma, Lisa Bike have also got Imogen Wolf, who was 22nd in Flanders last Sunday at the age of 19.
Oh, she's incredibly talented, isn't she? Kimberly Lecourt is definitely worth watching too. 5th at Flanders last week, 10th here last year. She's in the mix in almost every race at the moment.
She's been impressive this season, that's for sure. She will lead AG Insurance Soudal along with Gladys Verholst. Movistar don't look quite as strong as they did for Flanders. Rursa and Lippert aren't starting on Saturday. Hopefully Kat Ferguson will be. She finished 19th in Flanders in what is her first year as a senior rider.
Next up, a previous winner, Alison Jackson, one of the best wins of any race in recent years.
Yeah.
That was so good. She finished 1 place in front of Ferguson last Sunday. But like others we've mentioned, this race suits her better.
It'll be a big goal for this spring, for
Yeah.
sure, won't it? They've also got Letizia Borghese too, who had a standout ride in Flanders and was top 20 in Roubaix last year. Now, Elisa Longo Borghini skipped this race last year. She's a previous winner, of course, and it looks like she might be forced to do exactly the same thing this year because she crashed out of the Tour of Flanders and then was kept in hospital for observation overnight because she'd suffered a concussion. So I doubt that she'll be on the start line.
Canyon SRAM have got Zoe Bagstedt. Her dad won this race 21 years ago and she has all the attributes to do the same. That team also has Chiara Consoni. She's been top 10 here before and has a really fast sprint too.
She's fast.
Yeah.
She came close to beating Vibes a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember the race. Now, in the absence of Demi Vollering, FDJ Suez will look at Elise Chabi, Amber Crack and Marie Lenné. But a top 10, I would say, be a decent result for them. They'd be happy with that. We haven't mentioned Puk Pizza, Phoenix de Koning, have we?
We haven't. She's not raced Roubaix before, so that's going to be really interesting. She'll be at home on the cobbles, you would have thought.
You'd have thought so.
She crashed in Flanders, but seemed to be okay. I'd love to see her up there in the mix.
Same. I'd love to see that as well. Phoenix de Koning also have Christina Schweinberger, who's a solid rider herself. Liverlula's Letizia Paternoster. She was good in this race last year, so I'd imagine that she should be the leader of that team.
OK, let's move on to Weather Watch.
Oh, it's Weather Watch finally.
It's probably going to be a dry and dusty edition. There's been very little rain in Northern Europe for weeks now, and that looks to be the same this week. However, the current forecast, bearing in mind we're filming this on Monday, is for a chance of rain. Chance.
Oh, a chance. It's 18 degrees though, so it's warm for the time of year. But the most interesting thing, for me at least, is the current wind forecast, Connor. So it's looking like a strong southerly wind, and that means a very, very fast race because for the most part, they'll be heading northerly, and also means plenty of crosswind because the route crisscrosses around to get to the Pave sectors.
Yeah, good news for attackers, bad news for sprinters hoping to cling on to a group. What's the fastest ever edition?
Of the men's, it was last year's, I think, 47.8 kilometres per hour, which is 30 miles per hour, there or thereabouts.
Whoa.
Bonkers.
Probably won't be far off that this year.
Probably
by
not.
the sounds of it.
No.
OK, predictions time.
Can I go first?
OK.
OK, I'll start with the women's. I am going to go for Lorena Vibes.
Oof.
Yes,
Yeah.
She's focused on it, she's strong, she can follow almost anyone, and she can definitely outsprint them. And
Okay.
she's good on the track.
Strong argument.
Yeah.
I'm going with Lotte Kopecky, the obvious pick. I'm also going for the obvious pick in the men's, Van der Poel.
Ah,
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
I've got a few others, but yeah.
just playing it safe, Connor.
Yeah, no.
All right, in the men's then, I am going for Mads Pedersen. I sort of alluded to it earlier, but this is his year and this is his monument.
I would love to see that. One more prediction though. Pogačar, he's not going to win.
Oh my
I'd
goodness,
say
clip that up. What did you just say?
I don't think Pogačar's going to win. He can't. I don't think he'll win.
You said he won't win.
I'm not going to say he can't win, but I don't think he'll win.
Crikey.
I might live to regret it.
Well, neither of us have picked him. That says something, doesn't it? Maybe we are being very, very foolish indeed. Right, over to you at home then. Let us know your predictions for Saturday and Sunday in the comment section down below.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Enjoy a weekend in hell.